My dear friends, I have spent decades peering into the darkest corners of the human psyche, and what I have discovered about your relationship with money would astonish you. You sit there, perhaps frustrated, perhaps desperate, wondering why despite all your conscious efforts, all your budgets and plans and noble intentions, you continue to make the same destructive financial decisions over and over again. You read the books, you follow the gurus, you promise yourself that this time will be different, and yet here you are, trapped in patterns that seem to possess a will of their own. The answer lies not in your conscious mind, where you believe all decisions are made, but in the vast hidden realm of the unconscious, where primitive drives and forgotten traumas orchestrate your every financial move with the precision of a master puppeteer. What I am about to reveal to you will challenge everything you think you know about money, success, and human behavior. The quiet reason you lose control of your financial decisions is not laziness, not lack of willpower, not insufficient knowledge about investing or budgeting. It is something far more profound and far more treatable once properly understood. Your unconscious mind, shaped by experiences you may not even remember, has developed what I call financial neuroses, complex psychological structures that compel you to act against your own best interests. These neuroses operate beneath the threshold of awareness, influencing every purchase, every investment decision, every moment of financial anxiety or euphoria you experience. Consider for a moment the last time you made a financial decision that you later regretted. Perhaps you spent money you could not afford, or failed to invest when opportunity presented itself, or found yourself paralyzed by analysis when decisive action was required. In that moment, you were not truly in control. Your unconscious mind, driven by forces you do not understand, was making the decision for you. This is not a moral failing on your part. It is simply the human condition, but it is a condition that can be transformed through proper analysis and understanding. I want you to take a moment right now and think about your earliest memory involving money. What emotions arise when you recall that experience? Do not dismiss these feelings as irrelevant to your current financial situation, for they are the very foundation upon which your adult relationship with wealth has been constructed. The human psyche, as I have discovered through countless hours of clinical observation, operates according to principles that govern both our deepest desires and our most persistent fears. When it comes to financial behavior, three primary forces wage eternal war within the unconscious mind. The first is what I call the pleasure principle, the primitive drive to seek immediate gratification and avoid pain. This force compels you to spend impulsively, to choose short-term comfort over long-term security, to avoid the temporary discomfort of disciplined saving and investing. The second force is the reality principle, which develops as we mature and learn to delay gratification in service of greater future rewards. But there is a third force, one that most financial advisors completely ignore, and it is often the most powerful of all. This is the repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate familiar patterns, even when those patterns cause suffering. Your financial repetition compulsions were formed in childhood, often before you could even articulate what money meant. Perhaps your father worked endless hours but never seemed to have enough, creating in your young mind an association between effort and futility. Perhaps your mother hoarded possessions out of fear of scarcity, programming you to either repeat this pattern or rebel against it in equally destructive ways. Perhaps you witnessed fights about money that taught you that wealth brings conflict rather than peace. These early experiences, buried in the unconscious, continue to influence your financial decisions decades later, often in ways that appear completely irrational to your conscious mind. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives unconsciously reenacting these childhood dramas through their financial behavior, never realizing that they are not responding to present circumstances, but to ghosts from their past. The millionaire who cannot stop accumulating wealth despite having more than he could spend in several lifetimes is often trying to heal a childhood wound of inadequacy. The person who sabotages every financial success just as it approaches fruition may be unconsciously protecting themselves from surpassing a parent's achievements, fearing that success would mean abandonment or punishment. But here is what gives me hope, and what should give you hope as well. These unconscious patterns, no matter how deeply ingrained, are not permanent fixtures of your personality. They are learned responses that can be unlearned, understood, and transformed. The process requires courage, for it means facing aspects of yourself that you may have spent years avoiding, but the rewards extend far beyond mere financial success. When you understand the unconscious motivations behind your financial behavior, you gain not just control over your money, but deeper insight into the fundamental patterns that govern your entire life. Let me pause here and ask you something directly. Have you ever felt truly heard when it comes to your financial struggles? Not judged, not lectured about budgeting and compound interest, but truly understood in the depth of your experience. I see you nodding, or perhaps feeling a tightness in your chest, because this kind of understanding is rare in our world of quick fixes and surface solutions. If what I am saying resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, I want you to share that recognition in the comments below. Simply write "I see the pattern" and know that in doing so you are taking the first step toward genuine transformation. When you comment, you also help others who are walking the same path feel less alone in their struggle, creating a community of healing that extends far beyond what any one person can achieve in isolation. Your willingness to be vulnerable in this way serves both your own healing and the healing of others who may be too afraid to speak their truth. Now, let us delve deeper into the specific ways these unconscious patterns manifest in your daily financial life. The first and perhaps most common pattern I observe is what I call financial displacement, where emotions and conflicts that have nothing to do with money are expressed through financial behavior. The person who goes on shopping sprees when feeling unloved is not really seeking material objects. They are seeking the temporary feeling of being cared for that comes from the act of purchasing. The investor who makes increasingly risky trades after a personal disappointment is not responding to market conditions but attempting to regain a sense of control and potency through financial risk-taking. This displacement occurs because money, in our unconscious minds, becomes a symbol for every other form of power, love, security, and self-worth we have ever desired. When these deeper needs go unmet, we unconsciously turn to financial behavior as a substitute satisfaction, but because money cannot truly fulfill these psychological needs, we find ourselves caught in endless cycles of acquisition and loss, success and self-sabotage, hope and disappointment. Another crucial pattern is financial projection, where we unconsciously attribute our own fears and desires to external financial circumstances. The person who constantly predicts market crashes may be projecting their own inner sense of instability onto the economy. The individual who believes that wealthy people are inherently corrupt or immoral may be defending against their own unconscious desires for wealth by making it morally unacceptable. These projections not only distort our perception of financial reality, but they also create self-fulfilling prophecies that limit our ability to achieve genuine financial success. Perhaps most insidious of all is financial identification, where our sense of self becomes so intertwined with our financial status that any threat to our wealth feels like a threat to our very existence. This identification makes rational financial decision-making nearly impossible, because every choice becomes a referendum on our worth as human beings, rather than a practical matter of resource allocation. The person who cannot sell a losing investment because doing so would mean admitting they were wrong is not making a financial decision, but protecting their ego from narcissistic injury. The entrepreneur who refuses to pivot their failing business strategy may be unconsciously equating business failure with personal annihilation. These patterns are further complicated by what I call financial transference, where we unconsciously relate to money and financial institutions as if they were significant figures from our past. The person who feels overwhelming anxiety when dealing with banks may be unconsciously experiencing their banker as a stern, disapproving parent. The investor who follows financial gurus with blind devotion may be seeking the wise, protective father figure they never had. Understanding these transference patterns is crucial because they often determine not just what financial decisions we make, but how we feel about those decisions and whether we are able to learn from our successes and failures. The human capacity for financial rationalization is truly remarkable in its creativity and persistence. I have observed individuals construct elaborate intellectual justifications for financial behaviors that are clearly driven by unconscious emotional needs. The day trader who claims to be following a sophisticated technical analysis system but is actually seeking the excitement and validation that comes from high-stakes risk-taking. The chronic under-earner who insists they are prioritizing spiritual values over material wealth but is actually protecting themselves from the vulnerability that comes with visible success. These rationalizations serve an important psychological function by protecting the ego from painful truths, but they also prevent genuine insight and growth. What makes these patterns so difficult to recognize and change is that they operate largely outside conscious awareness, and when they do surface into consciousness, they are often disguised as reasonable responses to external circumstances. The unconscious mind is remarkably skilled at creating plausible explanations for behaviors that are actually driven by deeper psychological needs and conflicts. This is why purely rational approaches to financial improvement so often fail. You cannot solve an unconscious problem with conscious strategies alone, but there is profound hope in understanding these mechanisms, for once brought into the light of conscious awareness, they lose much of their compulsive power over your behavior. The process of making the unconscious conscious, which I have dedicated my life's work to understanding, can be applied with remarkable effectiveness to financial patterns and behaviors. Through careful self-analysis, attention to emotional responses surrounding money, and willingness to explore the deeper meanings behind your financial choices, you can begin to reclaim genuine control over your financial life. The key is to approach your financial behavior with the same curiosity and non-judgmental attention that a skilled analyst brings to understanding dreams or symptoms. Every financial decision, every emotional response to money, every pattern of success or failure contains valuable information about your unconscious motivations and conflicts. When you learn to decode this information, you gain access to psychological resources you may not have known you possessed. Consider the profound transformation that becomes possible when you understand that your financial struggles are not evidence of personal inadequacy but symptoms of unconscious conflicts that can be resolved. The person who has struggled with chronic debt may discover that their spending patterns are an unconscious attempt to nurture themselves in ways they were not nurtured as a child. Once this understanding dawns, they can begin to find healthier ways to meet those legitimate emotional needs while simultaneously developing more constructive financial habits. The investor who has repeatedly bought high and sold low may recognize that they are unconsciously seeking punishment for guilt they carry about early financial advantages or family wealth. With this insight, they can begin to address the underlying guilt directly rather than acting it out through self-destructive investment decisions. The entrepreneur who sabotages every business just as it approaches success may understand that they fear surpassing their parents' achievements and can work through this conflict therapeutically rather than continuing to reenact it financially. This psychoanalytic approach to financial transformation operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface level, you gain practical insight into why certain financial strategies have not worked for you and what approaches might be more effective given your psychological makeup. On a deeper level, you begin to heal the childhood wounds and unconscious conflicts that have been driving your financial behavior, creating space for more authentic and sustainable prosperity. The process requires patience, for the unconscious does not yield its secrets quickly or easily. It requires courage, for you will encounter aspects of yourself that you may have preferred to keep hidden. Most importantly, it requires compassion toward yourself, for you will discover that behaviors you may have judged harshly were actually ingenious unconscious attempts to meet legitimate psychological needs, even if the methods were ultimately self-defeating. As we near the end of our time together, I want you to understand that this work, this journey of bringing unconscious financial patterns into conscious awareness, is not a solitary endeavor. Just as my patients found healing through the relationship we formed in the analytic setting, your financial transformation will be supported and accelerated by connection with others who understand this deeper approach to wealth and success. The surface-level financial advice that dominates our culture, while not without value, often fails because it does not address the psychological roots of financial behavior. What I am offering you through this channel is something different, something deeper, and ultimately more transformative. Here you will find not just strategies and techniques, but genuine understanding of the psychological forces that drive financial success and failure. You will discover that you are not alone in your struggles, that the patterns you thought were evidence of personal weakness are actually universal human experiences that can be understood and transformed. If you are ready to move beyond the endless cycle of financial self-improvement that leads nowhere, if you are prepared to do the deeper work of understanding and healing the unconscious patterns that have been running your financial life, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. But understand that I am not asking for a casual commitment. This is an invitation to embark on a journey of genuine transformation that will challenge you to see yourself and your relationship with money in entirely new ways. But before you make this commitment, allow me to share with you one final layer of understanding that will illuminate why this psychoanalytic approach succeeds where others fail. What I have discovered through decades of clinical work is that financial behavior is never truly about money alone. It is about power, control, love, security, identity, and mortality itself. When we unconsciously use money as a substitute for these deeper human needs, we create what I call financial symptom formations, complex psychological structures that serve multiple unconscious purposes simultaneously. Consider the workaholic entrepreneur who accumulates wealth compulsively but never feels secure regardless of their net worth. On the surface, this appears to be simple greed or ambition, but deeper analysis reveals a more complex psychological truth. The endless accumulation serves as a defense against existential anxiety, the fundamental human terror of insignificance and death. By constantly growing their wealth, they unconsciously believe they are growing their importance, their permanence, their defense against the ultimate powerlessness that awaits us all. But because money cannot truly solve existential problems, the compulsion continues endlessly, leaving them trapped in a cycle of achievement without satisfaction. Or examine the chronic spender who experiences genuine euphoria with each purchase but inevitable depression afterward. This pattern reveals what I call the economics of the pleasure principle, where the unconscious mind seeks through consumption to recreate the oceanic feeling of perfect satisfaction that we experienced in earliest infancy. Each purchase represents an unconscious attempt to return to that state of complete fulfillment, but because adult consciousness can never truly recapture infantile satisfaction, the cycle of desire, gratification, and disappointment repeats endlessly. The tragedy is not the spending itself, but the futile attempt to solve an existential problem through material means. These symptom formations are remarkably resistant to conscious intervention because they serve important psychological functions even as they create suffering. The anxiety that drives compulsive saving also provides a sense of vigilance and control that feels safer than vulnerability. The guilt that leads to self-sabotage also serves as protection against the envy and potential abandonment that success might bring. This is why willpower alone is insufficient to change these patterns. You cannot simply decide to stop a behavior that your unconscious mind believes is protecting you from psychological or existential danger. The path forward requires what I call financial individuation, a process of separating your authentic financial goals from the unconscious psychological needs that have been driving your money behavior. This means learning to meet your needs for security, control, love, and significance through direct means rather than through the indirect and ultimately unsatisfying medium of financial accumulation or destruction. It means developing what I call a mature financial ego, one that can make practical decisions based on present reality rather than unconscious reenactments of childhood dramas. This mature financial ego possesses several crucial characteristics that distinguish it from the neurotic financial patterns I have been describing. First, it maintains what I call financial object constancy, the ability to make consistent decisions based on long-term goals rather than being swayed by momentary emotions or unconscious compulsions. Second, it demonstrates financial sublimation, channeling primitive drives and desires into constructive wealth-building activities rather than destructive patterns of consumption or risk-taking. Finally, it exhibits financial reality testing, the capacity to see money and financial circumstances clearly without the distortions created by projection, displacement, or identification. The development of this mature financial ego is not a quick process, nor should it be. Just as the formation of psychological symptoms often takes years or decades, their resolution requires patience and sustained attention. But unlike the gradual deterioration that occurs when unconscious patterns go unexamined, the process of bringing these patterns into consciousness creates exponential growth in both financial success and personal satisfaction. What makes this work particularly powerful is that as you heal the psychological roots of your financial struggles, you simultaneously gain access to psychological resources that were previously unavailable to you. The energy that was bound up in maintaining unconscious defenses becomes available for creative problem solving. The attention that was consumed by internal conflicts can be redirected toward external opportunities. The confidence that was undermined by unconscious guilt or fear can emerge to support bold but calculated risks. I have witnessed individuals transform not just their bank accounts, but their entire relationship with possibility itself through this process. The person who discovers that their fear of success was rooted in childhood loyalty conflicts often experiences a dramatic increase in professional achievement once this conflict is resolved. The individual who recognizes that their spending compulsions were attempts to heal narcissistic injuries frequently finds that addressing these injuries directly leads to both greater financial discipline and improved self-esteem. Let me share with you one more crucial insight that has emerged from my decades of analytical work, something I call the financial superego, which operates as an internalized critic that judges and punishes your every financial move according to standards you may not even consciously accept. This inner voice, formed from parental messages, cultural expectations, and early experiences of shame or pride around money, creates what I observe as financial moral masochism, where individuals unconsciously seek financial suffering as a form of psychological self-punishment for perceived transgressions that may have nothing whatsoever to do with money itself. The person who consistently undercharges for their services may be unconsciously atoning for early feelings of unworthiness or guilt about receiving attention and care. The investor who holds losing positions far too long may be unconsciously punishing themselves for some unrelated moral infraction, using financial loss as a form of penance that their superego demands. This financial superego can be even more destructive than the patterns we have already discussed, because it operates under the guise of moral rectitude, making its destructive influence particularly difficult to recognize and challenge. I have also observed that many individuals develop what I term financial defense mechanisms, unconscious psychological strategies designed to protect the ego from the anxiety and vulnerability that true financial success might bring. Sublimation transforms financial anxiety into workaholism or compulsive research about investments that never actually get made. Intellectualization turns every financial decision into an endless analytical exercise that prevents actual action. Regression causes adults to handle money with the emotional maturity of children, making impulsive purchases or refusing to engage with financial planning altogether. Perhaps most fascinating is the phenomenon I have identified as financial conversion, where psychological conflicts manifest as physical symptoms specifically triggered by financial stress. The chronic headaches that appear only when reviewing investment statements, the digestive problems that coincide with tax season, the insomnia that strikes whenever major financial decisions must be made. These somatic symptoms are not mere coincidence, but represent the body's attempt to express what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge about your relationship with money. The unconscious mind also creates what I call financial compromise formations, symptoms that attempt to satisfy multiple conflicting psychological needs simultaneously. The person who repeatedly starts businesses that fail just before becoming profitable may be unconsciously attempting to satisfy both their desire for success and their fear of outshining a parent or sibling. The chronic gambler seeks simultaneously the excitement of risk, the punishment of loss, and the fantasy of miraculous redemption, all wrapped into a single compulsive behavior that serves multiple unconscious masters. Understanding these deeper mechanisms reveals why so many intelligent, capable individuals find themselves trapped in financial patterns that seem to defy all logic and good intention. Your unconscious mind is not simply sabotaging your financial success out of malice or stupidity. It is attempting to solve complex psychological problems using the only tools it has available, often tools that were developed in childhood when your understanding of both psychology and finance was necessarily limited. The liberation that comes from this understanding cannot be overstated. When you recognize that your financial struggles represent ingenious unconscious attempts to meet legitimate psychological needs, you can begin to address those needs more directly and effectively. The part of you that sabotages financial success may be trying to protect you from the isolation that it fears comes with wealth, or the responsibility it believes accompanies financial power. Once you understand this protective intention, you can work with that part of yourself rather than against it, finding ways to achieve financial success while addressing the underlying concerns that have been driving the self-sabotage. This psychoanalytic approach to financial transformation also reveals the profound connection between money and mortality, a relationship that operates almost entirely in the unconscious realm but influences every financial decision you make. Money represents both security against death and the power to transcend mortal limitations, which is why financial losses can trigger such primitive anxiety, and why the accumulation of wealth can become a compulsive defense against existential terror. The person who cannot spend money even when they have more than enough may be unconsciously hoarding resources against an imagined future catastrophe that represents their fear of death itself. The work we do together will not always be comfortable, for growth rarely is, but it will be authentic, and it will be lasting. Unlike quick fixes that fade as soon as life becomes stressful, the insights you gain through this psychoanalytic approach to financial success will become permanent parts of your psychological toolkit, resources you can draw upon not just in financial matters, but in every area of your life, where unconscious patterns have been limiting your potential. You will discover reserves of wisdom, courage, and creativity within yourself that you may have forgotten you possessed, resources that become available once the psychological energy invested in maintaining financial neuroses is liberated for more constructive purposes. This is your invitation to stop being a victim of unconscious forces you do not understand, and to become the conscious architect of your own financial destiny. The choice as always is yours, but remember that no choice is also a choice, and the unconscious patterns that have been running your life will continue to do so until you decide to interrupt them with the light of conscious understanding. Your financial future, and indeed your entire life, hangs in the balance of this decision. Choose wisely, choose consciously, and choose in service of the person you have the potential to become rather than the person you have been conditioned to remain.